This is Chapter 4 from Hocker and Wilmot. While its focus, is on power overall, this particular video is going to focus on the important concept of power currencies and also the role of perception in these power currencies during conflict. Hocker and Wilmot talk about different power models or types, and one of the things we need to remember is that there are many influences on these particular types of power and how they're perceived. Specifically, cultural influences, cultural norms related to gender and sex and sexuality, status, all these different categories influence the type of power or the model of power that might be employed. Number one is designated power, and that is power given by your position. Often in U.S. culture, we give teachers and police officers and judges designated power. But there may be times when we do not do that, where we don't view it as a given or a sign of respect, that they should just naturally have more power. Number two is distributive power, which is what we call either or power. So distributive power is in reference to whether you see it as something you have or you don't. So most people believe that in a relationship, somebody has power and somebody else does not. Integrative power is a both-and power, where it really focuses much more on the relationship and that both people have different powers that exist. So we want to try to remember that cultural norms, right, and all different cultural categories influence how we define power, not only in our relationships, but also in conflict. One of the most interesting things about power is that Hocker and Wilmot, and therefore us, since we're talking about interpersonal conflict, not intrapersonal conflict, which is within oneself, is all about a relational theory of power. That when you're talking about conflict and conflict theories, power depends on what others perceive as your currency or major influence right now, at this moment. Now, this may change over time in the relationship, and it may also change during a conflict when you decide you no longer want to perceive somebody as having certain types of power over you or with you. So we must remember that it's all about perception. One of the best ways to think about this perception-based perspective about how power plays out in conflict is to think about the acronym RICE. R for resource control, I for interpersonal linkages, C for communication skills, and E for expertise. Number one, resource control. Think about the role of perception. If you think I control a resource and you want it, then you will allow me to have certain kinds of power over you or with you in a particular situation, and vice versa. So if I have been your guardian and I believe that I control the car because the car is in my name, but you want to use the car and we were having a conflict, I know that I could probably leverage that car against you in a conflict where you want something else to happen. So again, if I have it and you think it's important enough to allow somebody to influence me, if I say, you cannot do that or else you're not going to use the car, and the car is that important to you, then you will not do the action that you wanted to do before. So again, I have it and I think you want it. Number two, interpersonal linkages is not just about the connections you have to people, but it's about trying to leverage or use those linkages or connections that you have to certain people in the conflict to influence the other people or persons in the conflict. So I know person X, and that person will back me up, and you perceive that maybe as a threat or as a concern. A lot of times little kids will say, I'm telling mom. Well, if you think mom is the punisher of the group, right, somebody who can have consequences for you, then you might actually say, no, don't tell mom, I won't do it, I promise. So that person then you're allowing to have interpersonal linkage currency in that moment. However, if you were to say, I don't care, tell mom, because I'm going to go tell dad, and you say, oh no, don't tell dad, right? You start to begin to see that only if that other person connection is valued, thought of as important and influential, does the interpersonal connection or linkage you have and try to use, does it become a currency? Communication skills is number 3. And this is about appreciating somebody else's use of verbal and nonverbal communication skills. Maybe I try to exert my listening skills and influence you by asking parenthetical questions, paraphrasing, sending you notes, trying to be supportive. If you allow those things to happen, then you're indicating to me through your response that you agree that I have that kind of currency with you at that moment. Think about listening and persuasion specifically. But there are other communication skills, and these are related to verbal and nonverbal communication. Number 4 is expertise. And this is when we're in a conflict and we say we believe that other people should appreciate the knowledge that we have on a subject or a process that I bring to the conflict. So if I were discussing the motor of the car and my husband and I were in a conflict about whether or not we should get a new car and whether or not this older car is worth repairing each time, he would want me to say, well, I'm the one that has more knowledge about the way motors work, and I think we still have a lot of life left in this. But I may just, in fact, really want a new car, so I may not give him that power, right, or allow him to have that kind of influence over me. So again, it's about perception. Expertise is the last type. You may have multiple types of currencies, but minimally, you have 4 types that you can use. And again, based on others' perceptions and how much they value those currencies. Resource control, interpersonal linkages, communication skills, and expertise. In summary, when it comes to power currencies, we must remember that we're thinking about a relational theory of power. The most effective conflict participant develops several forms of power currencies and knows when to activate the different forms of power. Not all power is going to be assumed to be true or relevant, applicable in all conflicts merely because of the relationship, because things change. So remember, I can attempt a power currency. You can deny that power currency and what you say or do. You can also accept it. And if you accept it, it allows me to say and use that currency. So we're talking about attempts and denials and attempts and confirmations. That's what you're going to be looking for when you're analyzing Calvin and Hobbes' comic strip.